Ethan Mitchell wasn't always rich, but once he made it, he made sure everyone knew. In his mid-40s, with sharp suits, a custom-built mansion on the hill, and a garage full of European cars, he was the town's self-declared success story. He had built his fortune from a tech startup that exploded during the mobile app boom, and overnight his name was in local headlines, and his ego followed. Wherever he went, he made it clear. He had outgrown the small town of Fairpoint. He didn't walk into coffee shops. He strutted. Waitresses were talked down to, mechanics were mocked, and he never missed a chance to remind the townspeople how average they were. People smiled at him, sure, but behind his back, resentment simmered. Ethan believed he had earned the right to look down on others, forgetting that success without humility often leaves a trail of bitter memories. The town had supported him once. Old neighbors remembered when he worked late nights from his parents' garage, and local friends had chipped in to test his first app. But as the millions came in, so did the change in Ethan. He stopped returning calls, missed funerals, and declined wedding invites. Gratitude was replaced by condescension, and he wore his achievements like armor, protecting him from the empathy he no longer showed. Still, on paper, Ethan had it all. Stock options, speaking gigs, a sleek office in San Francisco, and a portfolio that most people would only dream of. But what he didn't realize was that while his net worth had climbed, his personal value in the eyes of those around him had quietly plummeted. And life, as it often does, was already preparing a storm he couldn't out-earn. It started with whispers in the boardroom. Ethan had ignored the CFO's warnings, brushing off concerns about inflated projections and shaky partnerships. He had grown too confident, too comfortable, believing that his past success guaranteed his future. But markets don't care about ego. A few missed quarters, one major investor pulling out, and suddenly cracks appeared in the foundation of his company. Cracks Ethan refused to see until it was too late. Then came the spiral. A bad merger drained the company's reserves. A risky expansion overseas collapsed under regulatory issues. Lawsuits followed. The media, once obsessed with his story, now tore him apart headline by headline. Clients vanished, and once loyal employees jumped ship. Ethan, who used to command rooms with certainty, now sat alone in meetings with lawyers and panic in his chest. The fall was faster than anyone imagined. Soon everything he had built was gone. His accounts were frozen. The mansion, once a symbol of pride, was sold in a foreclosure auction. His cars, his art, even his private jet liquidated. The same people who once smiled at him in town now stared with thinly veiled satisfaction. Ethan wasn't a millionaire anymore. He was just another man who thought he was untouchable, and got touched by reality. What hit hardest wasn't the money, it was the silence. Friends stopped calling. His phone, once ringing non-stop, stayed dark. He walked through town with his head down, hoping no one would recognize him, but they always did. Not because they missed him, but because they remembered how he made them feel. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something real: shame. The marble floors and vaulted ceilings were replaced by creaky tiles and water stains. Ethan moved into a tiny apartment on the edge of town, a far cry from the estate he once boasted about. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, the heating barely worked, and the street outside buzzed with noise and distant sirens. Every morning he stared at the cracked mirror above the sink, barely recognizing the man looking back. This wasn't a pause in his success story. This was a hard reset. His old phone book was useless now. No one returned his calls. Business partners disappeared. Former friends avoided eye contact at the grocery store. And even his assistant, who once praised his leadership, blocked his number. Ethan had spent years building walls with arrogance, dismissing, insulting, belittling. Now, those same walls trapped him in complete isolation. He hadn't just lost money, he'd lost people. Bissau. Town didn't pity him. If anything, it felt like they had waited for this moment. At the diner, whispers followed him from booth to booth. On the street, heads turned not in admiration, but with smirks. People remembered the times he mocked small businesses, underpaid workers, and acted like their struggles were beneath him. Now with the tables turned, the town seemed to enjoy watching him live the life he once looked down on, and Ethan felt every ounce of it. He carried the weight of his reputation like a stain he couldn't wash off. For the first time in his life, he had no power to buy comfort, fix mistakes, or silence critics. There was no shortcut, no deal to close, just quiet nights, unpaid bills, and the humbling realization that money couldn't cover character. And, without either, he was finally left to face the man he had become. Ethan never imagined he'd stand in line at a local food pantry, holding a dented grocery bag and avoiding eye contact. The man who once threw away catered leftovers now counted change for canned beans. The volunteers didn't recognize him, or maybe they did and just didn't care. There were no handshakes, no special treatment, only polite silence. For the first time, he understood how invisible struggle could be. His mailbox became a daily reminder of reality. Overdue notices, credit rejections, and disconnect warnings. The heat was shut off one night in December, and he sat on the floor, in layers of clothes, watching his breath fog in the air. That same night, someone from the building knocked, asking if he could keep the noise down, not out of malice, but because life here didn't make room for pity. Everyone was just surviving. Including him, Ethan tried reconnecting with old acquaintances, hoping for even a sliver of familiarity. But conversations were cold, distant. Some didn't reply. Others reminded him, subtly or not, of how he used to treat them. He'd scoffed at their goals, talked over their concerns, dismissed their opinions. Now those same people looked right through him, like he was no longer worth the energy. The loneliness he once wore like armor began to sink in like a weight. At night, the silence hit harder. Without meetings, events, or headlines to chase, Ethan was left alone with himself. He thought about the man he'd been, the one who stepped over people to climb higher, who used success as a shield. And for the first time, he didn't feel proud, he felt ashamed. Because deep down, he knew the money didn't corrupt him. It just revealed who he already was. And that realization hurt more than the fall. One rainy afternoon, Ethan ducked into a local shelter just to escape the cold. He hadn't planned on seeing anyone. Certainly not Claire Thomas, the girl who once sat behind him in algebra, the one he barely noticed back then. Now she stood before him in scrubs and a fleece jacket, clipboard in hand, offering a warm but cautious smile. "Ethan?" she said, surprised but not smug. "Didn't expect to see you here." He bristled, immediately on guard. Part of him wanted to walk away, pride still clinging to his bones. But something about Claire's presence, her calm, her lack of judgment, disarmed him. She didn't mock him or bring up the past. Instead, she asked a simple question. "Do you want to help?" Confused, he frowned. "With what?" She gestured around. "With people who feel just as lost as you do." Volunteering wasn't part of his plan. He was used to being the one in charge, not the one handing out sandwiches or folding donated clothes. The first few days he moved mechanically, doing the bare minimum, avoiding eye contact. But Claire kept checking in, never pushing, just encouraging. Slowly, the rhythm of honest work, the stories he overheard, and the quiet strength of those around him began to chip away at his defenses. One evening, as he cleaned tables after a community dinner, a boy no older than 10 walked up and simply said, "Thanks, mister." The words hit harder than any investor praise ever had. For the first time in months, Ethan didn't feel useless. He still didn't know what the future held, but for now, he had a reason to show up. And somehow, that was more valuable than anything he'd ever bought. As the weeks passed, Ethan's volunteer shifts became more than a way to pass time. They started grounding him. He began paying attention to people's stories instead of their appearances. He met single mothers juggling jobs and kids, seniors clinging to dignity, and young men trying to stay clean. They weren't bitter, they were kind, resilient, and grateful for every scrap of compassion. It was a humility Ethan had never known. One day, while organizing a donation drive, he crossed paths with Lucas, a tall, soft-spoken man with sharp eyes and a calm presence. Claire introduced him as someone who used to live on the streets, now the proud owner of a food cart that employed former addicts. Ethan couldn't believe it. "You?" he asked, half curious, half incredulous. Lucas nodded and simply said, "Everyone starts somewhere. I just stopped pretending I was better than the fall." Lucas wasn't interested in impressing anyone. Instead, he shared his path, how he'd lost everything to addiction, slept in alleys, and built his way back one step at a time through community programs. "It wasn't about saving face," he told Ethan. "It was about saving my soul." Those words stayed with Ethan, long after their conversation ended. For the first time, he realized he hadn't just lost money, he'd lost himself. Something inside Ethan shifted. He started showing up earlier. He stayed later. He asked questions, listened more, and judged less. Lucas became a mentor of sorts, not through advice, but by example. Ethan began to understand that true value wasn't in domination or luxury, but in how you show up for others when no one is watching. And that realization, small as it was, felt like a quiet beginning. The shift in Ethan wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. He began showing up earlier than expected, staying late to clean up after events, and taking on extra responsibilities at the community center. Working alongside Claire and Lucas, he found a rhythm that felt both meaningful and humbling. It wasn't glamorous, no cameras, no accolades, but it was real. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he was doing something that mattered. In the beginning, many people in town were skeptical. The same faces that had once avoided him now gave him wary glances. But as days turned into weeks, something started to change. They began to see him not as the arrogant millionaire who once looked down on them, but as a man rolling up his sleeves and working alongside them. It wasn't easy, and the road to earning their trust was long. But slowly, Ethan was starting to repair the cracks in his reputation, one small act at a time. His newfound confidence didn't come from the power of his wealth or the approval of others. It came from a quiet inner peace he hadn't known was possible. When he worked with Lucas to support a local youth mentorship program, or when he helped Claire organize a fundraiser for struggling families, Ethan felt proud. But it wasn't the pride of a man with money or status, it was the pride of a man who finally understood the value of giving without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, a woman who had once ignored him in the past stopped by the community center to thank him for helping her son with his schoolwork. Her words were simple, but they cut deep. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd be here, but I'm glad you are." That moment, small as it seemed, was a turning point. Ethan realized that his redemption wasn't just about fixing his own mistakes. It was about changing the way he saw and treated others, and for the first time that felt like enough. As Ethan's life continued to change, an unexpected opportunity appeared. One day, while volunteering at the community center, Ethan received a call from Peter, an old business partner. Peter had been involved in the tech industry for years and was looking for a new project to invest in. He wanted Ethan's help to bring a new startup to life. Despite the history of arrogance and greed that once defined their partnership, Peter saw something different in Ethan now, a man who had learned valuable lessons the hard way. Ethan felt a surge of uncertainty. The old him, the driven entrepreneur who thrived on ambition and wealth, would have jumped at the chance without hesitation. But now, his priorities had changed. The idea of returning to the tech world felt almost foreign. Yet, deep down, Ethan knew this could be his chance to rebuild, not just his wealth, but his character. He decided that if he was going to take this step, he would do it differently. This time, he would prioritize ethics, fairness, and the people who had supported him along the way. Ethan sat down with Peter and laid out his vision for the company. No longer obsessed with turning a quick profit, Ethan wanted to build something that would benefit the community, something that could bring jobs, opportunities, and resources to the people he'd learned to care for. Peter was skeptical, but Ethan's sincerity won him over. Together, they would create a company that focused on innovation while remaining committed to giving back to the very people who had helped Ethan find his way. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Ethan knew it would take time to convince the world and even himself that his change was real. But as he sat in that meeting, something clicked. This was the beginning of his redemption story, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. Ethan realized that success, when built on integrity and the desire to help others, had the power to heal more than just his bank account. It could heal relationships, communities, and even his soul. With the new business venture in full swing, Ethan began to see the results of his hard work and changed mindset. The company, which he named Community Tech, wasn't about the bottom line anymore. It was about creating real value, giving back to the people who had supported him, and offering opportunities to those who needed them the most. Ethan poured his heart into the business, not just for personal gain, but to create a ripple effect of positive change in the community. Slowly, the results began to show. At first, it wasn't easy. Ethan faced skepticism from some who doubted his transformation, but as the business started to grow, so did the trust people had in him. Local employees, once hesitant to work for him, saw a different side of Ethan, a leader who valued their input, who treated them with dignity and who celebrated their achievements. People started to speak highly of him again, and soon Ethan found that the town that once loathed him was now beginning to embrace him. The true test of Ethan's success came when his company began to give back. He implemented a program that provided jobs to disadvantaged youth and partnered with local schools to offer scholarships and mentorships in tech. It wasn't long before his small company became a beacon of hope, not just for his employees, but for the entire town. Ethan no longer cared about the flashy lifestyle or the expensive cars. He was rich in a way that mattered, rich in relationships, respect, and purpose. As his business flourished, Ethan realized that true success was no longer measured in profits or power. It was about the impact he had on the lives of others. The community, which had once celebrated his downfall, now respected his rise. Ethan had not only built a successful company, but he had redefined what success meant. He had proven that even the most arrogant millionaire could change, rebuild, and become a force for good in the world. Ethan's life had changed beyond measure. No longer driven by the need for status or material wealth, he found purpose in something far more meaningful. His new mindset was grounded in giving back, in building a legacy of kindness, integrity, and positive change. His focus shifted from how much he could accumulate to how much he could contribute to the world. Every decision he made, every action he took, was now guided by the desire to make a lasting impact. As time passed, the success of Ethan's new life became apparent not only in his flourishing business, but also in his personal fulfillment. The relationships he had once disregarded were now his greatest source of joy. His connection with his town, with the people who had watched him fall, was stronger than ever. Ethan became more involved in local events, offering mentorship to young entrepreneurs and helping those in need. His wealth no longer felt like a burden, but a tool to uplift others. The community saw Ethan for who he had become, not who he had been. His transformation was the talk of the town, and instead of resentment, he now felt a deep sense of belonging. The people who once cheered for his downfall now celebrated his rise. Ethan's journey had become a story of redemption, a story of how anyone, no matter their past, could change and build a future that mattered. And as Ethan continued to use his resources to support local initiatives and provide opportunities for others, his new legacy was taking shape. The arrogant millionaire was gone, replaced by a man of integrity and compassion. In the end, Ethan realized that true wealth wasn't measured by what you had, but by what you gave and what you left behind. If you've been inspired by Ethan's incredible transformation, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Millionaire Breakthrough for more stories of hope, change, and personal triumph. Join our community and let's build a brighter future together.